Arcadia has a large Chinese American community. And so it's concerning when someone is in that position of power who has previously, at the very least, acted on behalf of China.
The U.S. Department of Justice has recently accused Eileen Wang, the mayor of Arcadia, California, along with her co-conspirator Sun Yaoning, of receiving and carrying out instruction from the Chinese government officials to publish pro-Beijing content on a media website called U.S. News Center. Wang subsequently pleaded guilty and has resigned. This is the latest case of Chinese espionage involving alleged illegal Chinese agents infiltrating into local politics in foreign countries. But there's more. Last year in the Philippines, for example, there was the case of Alice Guo, the alleged Chinese spy who used fake Filipino ID and briefly became mayor of the Filipino city of Bambang in Tarlac province. Similar allegations have also surfaced in the UK, Australia, and elsewhere too. So on this increasingly global phenomenon of Chinese infiltration, how are countries responding to it? What are some challenges they face? And lastly, Taiwan. As the #1 target of China's influence operations and information warfare, what are some lessons learned from Taiwan's own experience, and how can the international community work together more to counter China's infiltration operations? Welcome to Taiwan Talks, everybody. I'm Wen-T Song. To unpack these issues, I'm joined by Christina Chen, Assistant Research Fellow, INDSR's Chinese Politics Division, and Michael Chen, Director of International Affairs at the DPP. Michael, Christina, thank you both for coming onto the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, can you give us an overview about the U.S. case? Tell us about it, and what did it tell you?
Well, thank you, Wen-T. Appreciate the chance to be here. Of course, as you mentioned and as the segment earlier showed, this is a case about Eileen Wang. She's been accused of serving as an illegal Chinese agent before she became mayor 4 or 5 years ago, mainly to spread disinformation on Chinese language websites that target the American Chinese community. These disinformation, we found out, include basically propaganda for China, for the Chinese regime, telling people, for example, that there are no labor camps in Xinjiang and no human rights issues. So those sort of things that kind of try to whitewash the image of the Beijing regime is what she's trying to spread within the community in the US. And so that's what she's been accused of. She's been accused, and she's pled guilty, by the way, of course, for failing to register as a foreign agent. So that has caused quite a shock and a scandal, not just in California, in her region, but in the country and here in Taiwan as well. It's a high-profile case, but of course, we know that it's not the only case.
Thank you, Mike, for that. And Christina, how about you? How do you look at the impact and the risk associated with this?
Well, I think Michael pointed out a very strong point is that this is a high-profile case, but it's not the only one. In fact, there's a lot of examples and cases of foreign influence operations, but I think it is important to distinguish between what's so-called malign foreign influence and the benign or the neutral ones. So according to a scholar, he actually defined the malign foreign operation as with activities that involve coercion, the corruption, deception, and concealment. So the difference is that these foreign influence operations, they are problematic because they are driven and intended to create disruptions within democratic society. So Michael pointed out that it's already raised a lot of controversies inside the U.S. So another important point is that it showed that the Chinese influence operation has appeared at the local levels.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, Mikey, I got to send you want to jump in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the key points that we should discuss is, and that this case shows, is how China is going into the suburbs and has gone into the suburbs to the local levels of government and community and politics, right? It's not just Washington, D.C. that they're targeting. Of course they are, but I think there's been intensified scrutiny on such covert activity, trying to carry out these exercises in Washington. And so they've, I think, turned their focus into the local level, and for many reasons. One, it's closer to the Chinese American community when you're at the local level. Easier to control, easier to influence. And secondly, I think all politics is local, right?
Yes.
Even the federal congressmen, senators, governors, they all rely on local support, down to the local community organization or the Chinese American Association, for example. These become key, levers that the Chinese try to exploit, and they do.
All right, all politics local. Excellent point there. I appreciate the point about almost like the 3C and 1D. Is it concealment, coercion, corruption, and deception?
Yes.
How you go about. And thank you for that academic framework. I think it helped us with analyzing the issue for sure. And Christina, just to build on this, Michael's point about politics starting with local, how do you think China goes about building these wide-ranging, networks across so many sectors and, of course, so many different societies?
Well, I think it's because in China, that's their intention. I mean, they have the United Front Work Department, which has been there, for decades, and so they are doing this in a systematic way, and in intention to create chaos and disruptions to suit the CCP's interest. And you mentioned, the cross sectors and across the society. This is another key feature, as Michael pointed out, that it's very influential when you go from one sector to the other, using the strategies that they use, and from the grassroots to the national. And I think I would like to point out another maybe a framework, because the scholar studying this also pointed out that all those influence operations, they are either driven by money or driven by people or information. So when it comes to money, it ranges from business investment, buying a media company, for example, to political donations. Right. Another one, when it comes to people, Michael pointed out, the community, grassroots organizations, church, diaspora Chinese communities, and so forth. The key is to build trust, create credibility. And the third one is information. So Eileen Wang's case shows that she's buying she uses the media outlet to spread the propaganda. And all those three elements have one characteristic. These are legal channels.
How about you, Mikey? I just expand on that issue about how, network building strategy for China is going into so many different sectors now, central level, local level, academia, business, and so many other sectors. What's your take on this?
Well, as Christina mentioned, I think these types of influence operations, they try to find the legal threshold and do things that are just below it.
Wow.
Right? And sometimes it becomes an ironic situation where the more clearly you define the legal boundary, the easier it is for them to find what is just below, right, and exploit it. And that's the challenge that we face, that all the countries face. But another point I'll go back about, Chinese activities targeting local politicians is that it's also an investment, because the city councilor of a small town today could be a congressman tomorrow, could be governor the next day. And that's the case of the famous case a few years ago of Feng Feng, the partner of former Congressman Eric Swalwell. Actually, Feng Feng, the case was exposed when Swalwell was congressman, but the relationship started years ago when Swalwell was a local city councilor. So she helped him organize the grassroots and found opportunities to get close to him, developed a romantic relationship, or some sort of relationship, and continued to support him even as he became congressman and gained influence. Swalwell, of course, later went to sit on the House Intelligence Committee.
So start investment, get in the game early when the pricing may be more accessible and affordable.
Exactly.
All right, just imagine the kind of longer term planning that might be going into it, isn't it? To identify, potential future prospect that's going to pay off.
They only need to success once. They can try with 10, but if they only succeed with one, that's good enough.
I'd like to add to your point about the longer term horizon. I think this is the mismatch or the structural mismatch between authoritarian regimes like China and democracies. Because, for authoritarian regimes like China, the CCP, they have a much longer time horizon.
Yeah.
Xi Jinping is there, and it seems that he's going to be there for a long time. But on the other hand, democracies, United States, in the case of Eileen Wang, I mean, they are facing much shorter term. The electoral cycles are, maybe 4 years, 5 years a term. So when it comes down to detecting and countering disinformation or the influence operations in general, for democracies it's much harder because the politicians, their incentives are structured as a way they would tackle the more crises, short-term problems. But the operation, the influence operation, they takes longer term to show up. As by individual cases, because they are blending with the legal channel, so it's harder to detect. And once democracies find out there's a problem, it's kind of cumulative and a little too late. So I think there's this structural mismatch, giving the authoritarian regimes like the CCP advantage in a sense.
All right, so the democracies, isn't it? We pride ourselves on our openness, but openness also perhaps create openings for malicious actors. All right, so we identify the problems. Let's think about what would be some responses to it. And so China's illicit agent networks and espionage activities, they obviously pose a serious threat to democratic open societies. Countries, including US, UK, and Australia, have all introduced laws and sanctions targeting such activities. The UK, which has uncovered multiple cases involving alleged Chinese agents and espionage operations this year, has become particularly concerned. UK Security Minister, in a report delivered to the British Parliament, warned about the gravity and consequences of these. Take a look.
We remain deeply concerned by an increasing pattern of covert activity from Chinese state-linked actors targeting UK democracy. But let me be clear. If there is proven evidence of attempts by China to interfere with UK sovereign affairs, we will impose severe consequences and hold all actors involved to account.
All right, that's their British minister highlighting the risk of such infiltration attempts from the Chinese side. And we're seeing, of course, FARA, that's Foreign Agent Registration Act, legislations emerging in a number of countries. Mikey, can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Well, of course, I think democracies are responding to a new era of influence, operations that blur traditional, espionage and lobbying and business activities, social media, political interference, all sorts of things that are blended together and create this new challenge that needs to be dealt with. And one of the methods to deal with this challenge is through requiring more transparency. I think that's the main point of legislation like FARA. It's to require transparency, require that you register at a minimum, because I think it's easier to prove failure to register than it is to prove that you actually did, carry out these operations, because in a lot of cases we require evidence to back up these claims, and sometimes the evidence is in China, right? But to demonstrate that you've failed to register as an agent, as a foreign agent, is easier. And so that's a way that governments are using to respond to this challenge.
Right, excellent point there. And how about you, Christina? How do you look at the purpose and effect of these FARA legislation, and are they working?
The countries are responding with FARA, with these kind of legislations, because they are having a change in perception of China. It started, I think, around late 2010s, when many countries they realized that the way they used to engage with China, with the hope to kind of integrate China into the global order, has failed, because China has become more aggressive, not only militarily, has modernized, expanded its military capabilities, and caused a lot of gray zone activities in our region. But also, we saw diplomatically the rise of the warrior wolf diplomacy. So they become very aggressive. And also, the controversy surrounding Huawei has revealed to these countries that there's a problem when you have purchased or use Chinese telecommunication infrastructure, you are suspected to surveillance by China, or the data that are there can be transmitted to the Chinese CCP. So I think those, along with the problem of the electoral intervention, has made countries realize that China may no longer be just an opportunity, but more of a threat.
Yeah. Indeed. And Mikey, how about you? How about your take on this?
Well, I think another aspect of the importance of FARA is that it protects legitimate foreign agents, in the sense that foreign agent itself is not a bad word. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a spy. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're there to conduct influence operations that are illicit. It simply means that you are lobbying, advocating on behalf of a foreign government or entity or company. And that's perfectly fine if it's perfectly transparent, right? There are, of course, lobbyists that represent interests of foreign countries in Washington all over the place. And so setting up a system to protect them, giving them the right space to operate, to conduct their activities, is also one of the interests of setting up these systems.
This makes sense, like having the right, I guess, transparent guidelines or framework to tell the good actor from bad ones.
Yeah.
All right, and Christina, lastly to you as well. So FARA, we talk about how it may be effective, what will be the, I guess, the strong suit of it. What do you see will be some, I guess, remaining challenges or inadequacies or loopholes that need to be fixed, or if they're fixable?
I think Michael pointed out is that you need to strike balance between, the malign and the benign foreign influence operations. And I think it's always a core of that. Because, if you have a broader scope of registration, then it may lead to criticisms of overreacting rather than underreacting. So there's criticisms of, you may use this as a tool against your political opponents. You may create disruptions or stigmatizing the Chinese communities in those countries, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, legislations, they are definitely raising the accountability and raising the cost of conducting those influence operations. But I think maybe a better approach is, instead of focusing on how to structure or reform those legislation, to maybe raise societal awareness, to help society, to the public, to become more aware of these incidents and these activities.
All right, I think I hear increased awareness and increased transparency, similar thing really, and which is naturally a strong suit for democratic societies anyway, to start out with. For many years, Taiwan has faced persistent infiltration by Chinese spies and proxy agents. In response to this, in 2019, Taiwan's parliament passed the Anti-Infiltration Act, which aimed to prevent Taiwanese citizens from accepting instructions, directives, or funding from external hostile forces, such as the Chinese Communist Party. However, as Beijing continues to evolve its tactics, Taiwan has recently begun considering amendments to strengthen penalties and expand legal measures against such activities. Here are some sobering words from Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te. Take a look.
数十年来，中国并吞台湾、消灭中华民国的野心，没有一天改变过。不仅仅持续文攻武吓，对台湾社会的统战渗透也越来越严重。这样的中国，已是我国反渗透法所定义的境外敌对势力。我们没有选择，必须采取更积极的作为。
All right, Mikey, tell us about some of the highlights or lessons learned from the Taiwan experience.
Well, Taiwan's been effectively on the front line of foreign interference from China for a long time, for decades. So what some countries are just experiencing or just discovering, we've been living for many, many years. So China's approach to us is, of course, quite comprehensive. There is the military pressure, there's the political pressure, economic coercion, and then there's the societal influence operations that they're trying to carry out. And it takes shape in many, many ways, of course. We have, and again, as in the case in the US, all politics is local. So we have local organizations being targeted, village to the village level, the village chief, little boroughs, their heads being targeted, being invited to free trips to China, for example, and they can bring along some of their core constituents, etc. Religious organizations, we have a lot of temples that China has been working really hard to build these ties with, kind of appealing to this common identity, even though religion isn't technically allowed in China. They build these frameworks and rhetoric as if they worship Mao Zedong as well, right? For example. And online, we have a lot of online chat groups on Facebook that become the target of Chinese influence operations. And sometimes, and they do it smartly, of course. Sometimes it's subtle. You can't tell from the beginning. They focus on lifestyle and cultural and harmless topics.
And how about you, Christina? What do you think are some of the important lessons from the Taiwan experience handling these?
As we observed, the influence operation tactics using by the CCP have become more and more sophisticated over time. I mean, it's gone down to the local levels. But it does not mean that Taiwan is totally weak and vulnerable. In fact, I think Taiwan, throughout these experiences, has learned some countermeasures to resist these influence operations. For example, in 2018, the local elections in Taiwan, there's a lot of cases of China infiltrating and interfering with the elections. So in response, I think Taiwan came up with some ways to deal. For example, this fact-checking infrastructure, and also the governments have come to coordinate it. So the different ministries, they coordinate it, and also there's a public media literacy efforts in effort to counter. And I think these has shown some progress, that Taiwanese society has become more resilient against the disinformation and also the influence operations in general.
Right. And Mike, there's a question I want to ask about how Taiwan goes about managing the fine line between, I guess, legitimate interactions and more illicit, potentially malicious infiltration attempts. We know that China, of course, is a very hyper-politicized society. They even say something to the effect of, party, government, military, academics, businesses, party rules over everything. And so it's a very hyper-politicized environment, and yet we also don't want to paint 1.4 billion people with one broad brush either. So how do we tell a line between legitimate exchanges and more problematically risky ones?
I think it's a challenge. Of course, we don't want to paint 1.4 billion Chinese as potential influence operation suspects. We also don't want to paint the Chinese diaspora community in Taiwan. Right? We have a lot of people with family ties in China. We have a lot of people with one parent from China. We have a lot of people still who do business in China. Of course, we're not going to paint, kind of these broad strokes, and we shouldn't. At the same time, it's important that we recognize and accept that there's a need to apply more scrutiny. And it's because I think that's one of the weaknesses of democracies, that or liberalism. We tend to, by nature, want to make sure that there's no discrimination whatsoever. Of course, that's not what we want. At the same time, it's important to recognize that because of the way the Chinese government is and the Communist Party operates and their constitution and their government, the relationship between a Chinese national and their government is not the same as a relationship between a Taiwan national and Taiwan's government, or a U.S. citizen with its government. The U.S. citizen is not bound legally to be loyal or act as an agent to its government, whereas a Chinese citizen, unfortunately, is. We are the target of a lot of Chinese influence operations, and there's a need, therefore, to, I think, apply more scrutiny on this issue.
Lastly, Christina, how about your advice or two in terms of how Taiwan can distill its experience and better work with other like-minded partner countries around the world on this?
I think, well, Taiwan does have a lot to share when it comes to countering disinformation, as I pointed out earlier, or influence operations in general. Well, given the current situation, it may be hard for Taiwan to have some official exchanges with other countries, but that does not mean we don't have other ways. For example, I mean, Taiwan has a very vibrant civil society. These organizations are very active in working on how to counter those influence operations. So we can have those civil society actors collaborating and having exchanges with other countries to share insights, to share experiences. I mean, I work at a think tank. At our think tank, we also do these track to dialogues with other think tanks from across countries, democracies. So I mean, on the societal level, and also private sector level, there's also a lot of opportunities to have interactions, to share Taiwan's experience and to learn from other democracies.
All right, excellent insights from the both of you. And I'd like to thank you, Michael. Thank you also, Christina, for coming onto the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's our show. I'd like to thank you, viewers at home, for tuning in. Come and check us out on YouTube. And until next time, it's good night from us from Taipei.